Hey, Alexa.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to the My Mind of Film 2021 panel discussion on the topic of love, compassion, and friendship. I'm Danny, and I'll be both your MC and moderator for today's meaningful event. So before we get the ball rolling, I would like to inform everyone here that this session will be recorded for our reference, but rest assured that the recorded session will be privately confidential, all right? So moving on, in case anybody here isn't too familiar with MMOF and in terms of what we do, just for the benefit of quick introduction to you all is that My Mind on Film is a Malaysian mental health short film festival for young adults. This project is central to the Center of Mental Health and Wellbeing, commitment to engaging with young people, specifically out hearing on their voices, working together for progress specifically in the area of mental health. So this year, MMOF is actually welcoming short film submission on the theme of heart and mind, as you can see in the slides over here. And we are focusing in three categories, which is the first one will be Malaysian high schoolers. Secondly will be Malaysian young adults. And lastly is international young adults. So we gladly open the film submissions for your from now until 31st December of this year, which is right at the end of the year. So if you feel to have no more about the information about this in terms of what we do, feel free to check out our official website and the social media links, which will be shortly posted in the chat box, which is right now, all right? So in today's session, we have invited three special guest speakers today that we have over here to discuss on the topic of love, compassion, and friendship. So you may want to grab yourself with a piece of paper and a pen because to jot down the rich and meaningful insight that you may get out of this conversation today, because it is 100% guaranteed that you do not really want to miss this out. Or you may just simply just listen with an open heart and mind and gaining insights to your burning questions or curiosity in relation to our main topics, which will be discussed today. And trust us, that 1 hour and 30 minutes will just fly by just like that. And no, I'm not imitating Thanos from the Avengers of movie because that's how much we love you all. We do not want you all to disappear from this event. We hope that you will stay with us throughout this event until 11:30 today. So moving on, before we begin, let's have an overview of what is to be expected from today's session, as well as some housekeeping items. All right, can we double check if the slides is up here? Checking in with the team. Okay, great. It's back. All right, so let's continue. Moving on, before we begin, let's have an overview of what is to be expected from today's session, as well as some housekeeping items. Firstly, number one, we aim to end this discussion within 1 hour and 30 minutes. Secondly, today's session is a panel discussion, once again on the topic of love, compassion, and friendship, which will be discussed among our three guest speakers over here. And of course, not to forget our respected audience, which is in the room today with us, that you too will actually be engaging with us as well in the chat box during our sharing session today. There will be a Q&A session, and how this works is that right at the end of our discussion, last 15 minutes, will be a special time for you to post your questions, any question, there's no right or wrong, to our guest speakers today over here in regards to the topic should you have any, all right? So just a fun fact over here is that for the audience, in case whatever that you see on the screen right now, if you realize that the slides projected and the size of the panel discussion speakers is a bit not too up to your preference, what you can actually do is that you may readjust the size up to your preference based on your own comfort zone, all right? And lastly, this is a virtual event, and during the last 2 years of the pandemic, it has been hard for us. So all of us do crave in-person interaction, true or true? Definitely it's true, right? Although some of us may not relate to that, but it's okay. We welcome everyone in terms of your preference. So do turn on your camera throughout this session because it will be much more likable to be engageable through one another, especially it's an online event over here, all right? And just a hint, a fun fact, your chat box today will be your best friend here because your chat box can also be a very precious tool for you to engage with us, not only with among yourself, but also with the speakers today over here today as well. All right, so without further ado, moving on. With that said, let's begin our session starting with introducing our guest speakers over here today. Firstly, our first speaker is Dr. Leyla, and she specializes in the science of the self, innovative thought, language interpretation, and the power of transformation. She also contributes as a co-investigator to the project on the study of love in religion at Regent College, the University of Oxford. And so just a quick introduction about yourself, Dr. Leyla, just a fun fact to share about yourself. Ever since you came to Malaysia to actually pursue your personal life as well as your career of pursuit in life, ever since you came from Iran to Malaysia, based on your expertise and your understanding about love throughout your transition life, how will you actually cope with such life transition that you are experiencing ever since you came down from Iran to Malaysia up to very today? The floor is yours, Dr. Leyla.
Thank you so much, Danny. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, that's a very good question. And it seems that the coronavirus pandemic is all about human connectivity, even though we are isolated. And it's very kind of you that this is the opportunity that I can share with you my own story during the time of social isolation when I moved to Malaysia. So I was living with my son in Turkey. I'm from Iran, but we were in Turkey for 1 year. And the 10th of March, I remember, I had flight to Kuala Lumpur. And because of COVID, I had to isolate myself, as you know, for 2 weeks. And right after that, the lockdown in Malaysia began. You remember that it was 16th of March, the MCO started. So I lived alone in a new flat. And this was the first time in my life that I was living by myself in a foreign country. And since the country was on lockdown, I could not be involved in any social activities. And this made me feel very isolated, and I felt I am in prison. So then I didn't even have a Wi-Fi because people should come into my house to, install Time, for example. So there was no Wi-Fi at home, nobody to talk. And at the same time, I was worried about my son who was alone in Istanbul. He was only 18 years old. And I didn't know what is he going to do during this time for COVID. And also my daughter, who is also alone in New York, she was studying at Stony Brook, so she was also there in this situation. My husband was in lockdown in Jakarta, so the whole family were isolated from each other and from everyone. But believe me, I did not feel lonely, depressed, or stressed, or surprised. And I was surprised that I am living with the highest spirit, and also I'm thankful for that. But how did I manage to avoid this all the negative feeling about being alone, like feeling in prison and this kind of negative feeling? It was only because of love. After I did my PhD, I learned that something very good can help me, the phrase, in any situation that is maybe not clear to us, we are suffering in any situation, or it is you don't know how to decide, or it makes you uncomfortable and confusing, ask yourself, what would love do? And this phrase helped me a lot. I asked myself, what would love do? And if your feeling or your situation is based on fear, if it is based on hatred or based on angriness, if it is based on negative emotion or bitter emotion, we need to transform this negative emotion to positive emotion. So I learned that by asking this question, I can concentrate to my surrounding, my situation, and imagine there is a room. So there is one door that when fear comes to the room, love run away. Why? Because love is light and fear is dark, for example. Angriness is dark. So you cannot have light and dark at the same time in the room. Okay. So when I realized that, okay, I have fear of loneliness. I have fear of I am not secure. So I asked myself, what would love do? And I realized that, okay, this is the time for me to rebuild my foundation, focus on myself, rebuild my foundation, and feel inner happiness. So I practice self-love. That was the best situation for me. And so I started to practicing self-love, and I could cope with my fear. But at the same time, I have this question. So how about love of others? Because I really need to connect with other people like my friend. So, but I was feeling the love of others also with all my heart. During that time, my friend who lives in Putrajaya, every day she gives me such love and support emotionally and physically by sending some food. My neighbor, when they went to the market, they also buy some stuff for me. And even my colleague at Health University, they asked me, how am I doing? And so with the spice of love, I could cope with the situation. And this is compassion and love and friendship that I have received from compassionate people and friends during my isolated time. So if we want to have a better world, if we have to learn, keep our community's needs top of mind, and we shouldn't forget that be awareness of mental health and well-being of ourselves, and also for our neighbor, maybe they need our compassion and help, and we can be effective and spread love globally. So we should not forget that love of others as well as love of self is very important.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Leyla, for sharing about that. It's interesting to see that how it's definitely not easy for you, especially coming from Iran, to adapt to a new culture, new place to live in, new country. Everything is so new, and yet really, really admire you in terms of how you really transform on your challenges into something which is seen to be as hope, as a beauty, as something where you actually relate to the idea of love and learning how to be, you link into the idea of being compassionate ourselves, self-love, and love others to ensure that it is actually at the end of the day a much more meaningful life to live in despite the challenges. Beautiful, Dr. Leyla. In fact, to the audience over here, if you're wondering what has been shared by Dr. Leyla, stay tuned because Dr. Leyla will share more about her experiences when it comes to love later on. So now, without further ado, let's move on to the next speaker over here that we have. Moving on, our second speaker today is Che Puan Sarimah binti Ibrahim. She's a well-known Malaysian award-winning television host, actress, singer, and radio announcer. And she strongly believes that Malaysians should keep the conversations going openly and honestly, and to know that it's okay to not be okay. That's the phrase that she strongly believes in, and that hope and recovery is always possible. Interestingly though, Puan Sarimah is also of an Irish, Malay, and Chinese heritage, and studied psychology as a major in college in health as well. So Puan Sarimah, aware that you are coming from a well-diverse cultural heritage with a little mix of Irish, Malay, and Chinese, perhaps share a few thoughts in maybe a few sentences in terms of, do you think there's any difference in how is both love and friendship, or perhaps compassion, kind of relationship developed in countries between Malaysia and Ireland, for example? Goes to you.
So sorry, Danny, I didn't quite understand what you meant. So yeah, I think I missed out because your mic's a little bit. So what was your question again?
Yes, so considering that you're actually coming from a
Mixed,
diverse heritage, like you're a mix of Irish, Malay, and Chinese. So wondering from this cultural background, do you perhaps could see any difference or perhaps similarity in terms of the differences on how love, compassion, and friendship could be developed in relationships in the countries between Ireland and Malaysia, by chance?
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, every culture has their own language of love, their own language of compassion, and their own culture of friendship. So, for example, in the West, obviously, Oh, but before I start, I just want to say hi. Thank you to Dr. Mark and Dr. Leyla and everybody here. I want to just get into it. So I'm very happy to be invited to be a speaker. And yes, I have been a student at Help University so long ago. So I feel so old, but it's okay. It's lovely to be back again. So thank you very much for having me. So basically, yes, being from different backgrounds, Danny, it is, I mean, even Dr. Leyla has just spoken about her experience. I mean, how we interpret and perceive love is different in every culture because of how we're raised. I mean, we can go into the biological part of it all and, you know, I leave that to the experts like the doctors. But from what I can see, every culture wants love, wants to express care, basically. What is love? Love is an action. I mean, it's a word in English that we've given to it, whether it's cinta or whatever you call it. It is care. It is being careful with another person, being careful with yourself as well. And depending on each culture, like in Ireland, the expression of love in the West is a little bit more external. I show you love by hugging you, you know, kissing on the cheek or a big squeeze, or, you know, so often Irish people bring you for a drink, for example, or I buy you, you know, food or etc. Or, you know, we do things together. Yeah, there's a different expression there, you know, of how love is. And they're much more physical beings. The boundaries are a bit less, I would say, controlled as per the boundaries in the culture of, say, Malaysia, and how we are in Malaysia, for example, or in Asian countries. And of course, it's dependent not only in the culture, but of course the religion, etc. And the different sets of sociological rules or understandings that are in place, which I'm sure Dr. Leyla would explain about and help you understand. But from my perspective, in Malaysia, the way my family was here in Malaysia, there was not so much hugging to show we love you. There was no kissing. Like when I went back to Kampong in Johor, like my grandma in Kampong, she would never hug and kiss me. It would be more like salam, you know, you kiss hands. And that's about as much physical affection that you get. But she expressed her love in things such as, you know, preparing food that she knew I liked in advance. So this was her way of showing I care for you. There's thought for you. There is, I take my time and energy to have thoughts and do something for you. And I may not touch you, but this is how I hope to touch your heart. So love is expressed in a different way. So in Ireland, I expressed it differently. I would be squeezed and squeezed to death almost by my family there, you know, squeeze, hug, hold hands, you know. But here it was, I'm going to cook and cook and cook and feed you, you know. So every culture has its own way of, you know, showing love, kasih sayang, you know. And then of course there's different types of love. I mean, if we break it down, you know, into detail, we'll be here until next week. But love over there, girlfriend, boyfriend, okay, you know, you can go with your girlfriend, your boyfriend, and it's much more experimental and it's much more socially acceptable to have your first kiss, for example. I show you I love you, I choose you as being special by letting you be the first person to kiss me, for example. You see this in the movies a lot in Western cultures, for example. I'm not generalizing, but just as an example. Whereas here, that's obviously not acceptable. You're not going to kiss me. It's against my religion. It's against my culture. If you want to show you love me, you go talk to my parents. You go merisik, you go ask them for my hand, for example, in more stricter boundaries, you know? So there's definitely a difference, but the underlying theme of love is you are special to me enough that I take the time and energy to care for you in the way that I know how to.
Beautiful, Puan Sarimah. Thank you for putting it so beautifully. From here, we can see that culture does play a role in terms of how each of us express love differently, in terms of what we need, in terms of how we perceive love may be different as well. And yet, there's common similarity is that love indeed at the end of the day is still love, although it is expressed differently. Thank you, Puan Sarimah, for putting this so beautifully. So to the audience over here, if you are willing to share, feel free to share. What is the love language? Your love languages? Could it be just more on action-based? Is it open expressively? So feel free to engage with us by sharing your love language in the chat box. So now, without further ado, last but not least, let's move on to the next one, which is our very first speaker, Salah Hadin Kodel. So Salah is actually a third-year psychology student at TAP currently, and he's actually working on his thesis friendship experiences of undergraduates at MITS Online Learning. All right, he's the founder and the host of the Tea Buddies podcast, where, as they say, they talk about tea, friendship, and anything in between. All right, Salah has also been actively involved in mental health-driven movements in Malaysia, and he shares a great fondness for art and literature. And he's also a certified person calligrapher. All right. So Salah, can also see that you did quite an amount of work in calligraphy, aside from Tea Buddies podcast, aside your area of interest in friendship and your mental health-driven movement, which you're actively involved in. By chance, do you see any potentiality in actually, perhaps since now you actually have a Tea Buddies podcast, do you see any possibility in coming up with, let's say, calligraphy buddies podcast? Go to you.
Oh, first of all, very good morning to everyone. I feel already very blessed to be in this conversation here. Very interesting points already being shared before we already start the real talk here. About mixing calligraphy with, I don't know, that way. I mean, that's something I wanted to do for the Persian audience because I thought they would relate better to, Persian calligraphy. And it'd be something difficult to explain in the Asian, I mean, like in the Southeast Asian context. But that'd be definitely, I'm open to new things. I'm like very high on the trait openness, so why not? If I were given the chance, definitely start a podcast on calligraphy, something like that.
All right, thanks for sharing about that, Salah. So
No
as you can see that Salah over here, Salah is the kind of person who not only focuses on what he's interested in, but is also someone in terms of personality, being open to possibilities if it is actually possible to be created based on opportunity.
Oh, definitely.
All right, thanks for sharing, Salah.
No.
So now, without further ado, let's move on to the next one, which is, if you're aware, just now we roughly talk about Tea Buddies. If you are wondering what's Tea Buddies all about, we mentioned about podcast. So dear audience, if you remember that Tea Buddies podcast is actually a focus on social relationships, especially in terms of friendships, and that offers new perspectives in terms of how to maintain and upgrade the quality of our relationships. Not only in terms of friendships, it can be any kind of relation that you name it, be it family, romantic relationship, or anything in between. All right. If this is something that sparks your interest, so do follow their social media page, which is actually, you can actually observe in this slide itself, or alternatively, feel free to follow their social media page by accessing to their Spotify to access their podcast, or LinkedIn, and also Instagram page as well, which is just only sent right shortly in the chat box. All right. Okay, so that's on our brief introduction to our fellow three guest speakers over here. Beautiful introduction. Thank you for sharing. Now let's officially, really this time, to really start off our panel discussion on the topic of love, compassion, and friendship, where this is probably the highlight of why our fellow audience are here today in this early morning as well. So moving on, let's start off by having Dr. Leyla to actually share her insightful thoughts on the first question in the aspect of love, which is, are there any categories of love? If yes, how many kinds of love are there? Dr. Leyla, goes to you.
Thank you, Danny. Yes, in fact, when, as Puan Sarimah also mentioned, when the word love comes up, romantic love is the first thing that will pop up in our mind. So love of the being romance. So definitely it's the beautiful definition of love, but the word love seems to cover a wide variety of feelings, attitudes, and behavior. So here I want to give you categories of the concept of love in forms and types. So there are different types of love to consider, as you can see from the slide, such as charity, empathy, bliss, goodwill, faith, respect, worship, devotion, understanding, amicability, passion, and of course, compassion. But I would like to share with you the 7 forms of love that is gathered from the ancient Greeks. So the first form of love is eros, or romantic love. We all know about that. The second one, which is our topic today, is philia or friendship. The third forms of love is storge or familial love, a love between parents and children. And then the fourth form of love is agape, which is a universal love or divine love in spirituality. Then we have lotus or playful love. And there is some kind of agreement between the two friends and to want to have this type of love, form of love. And then we have pragma or practical love. Also, there is agreement involved, but they are different. The definition is different. And the last one is flascia or self-love. And among these different forms of love, we are going to focus on the second one, which is philia. We will talk about it more.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing this, Dr. Leyla. So to our youth audience over here, if you are wondering initially, you think that love is more on lovey-dovey, I love you or you love me kind of relationship, like romantic kind of relationship, which is actually just one part of what is love all about. Love is a very huge topic we are talking about today. It's an interesting topic, but for our audience, from what we can hear over here is that love is not only focuses on the eros type of love, which is more on the romantic or the passion type of love. We also have the different type of love in terms of filial love, which is shortly will be discussed more by Sana in terms of what is differentiate more towards of it. And of course, the idea of compassion as well, which is a part of love as well. So perhaps let's bring in on the perspective of Puan Sarimah. What are your thoughts about how compassion actually plays a role in the aspect of love as well?
Hi, thanks, Danny. Compassion, I think, is the action of love. It is a fundamental action of love itself. The difference is a lot of people seem to confuse compassion with sympathy of some sort or rescuing behavior. So if I have compassion for you, it means that I must rescue you or save you from a situation that's difficult for you. Whereas it's not necessarily so. And sometimes the question comes up, if you do love someone, meaning you care for them holistically, their whole well-being, is it your place to rescue them, so to speak, or save them from a situation, a person, or an environment where they have the opportunity to grow? And this is something that I constantly struggle with in my life personally, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, and as a public figure, because a lot of people do message me and ask me for things. When I say things, I don't mean money and cash, but to help them remove them from situations that are difficult. So they would say, have some compassion, Sarimah. And I would say, this is so hard to explain because in every culture, you know, I'm sure Dr. Leyla and Salah and all of us here, you get what I mean. But having compassion for someone doesn't necessarily mean putting them out of their misery. But it also means being there in a way that perhaps emotionally or psychologically is present for them through that difficulty. And in the same way, we are compassionate to ourselves. So instead of trying to remove ourselves from something that's difficult or save ourselves, it's the ability to sit through what's difficult and grow through that process and have that compassion for yourself and others. So I see it as an act of love. It's part and parcel of being loving. You know, it's like a child, like my daughter. I see her struggling with something, for example, like her Lego or something, she's trying to build it. And I feel, oh, you know, I think I can help her. I should go over there now. And she can't get the Lego in the box properly. And she's frustrated. And I feel like, you know, out of compassion, I want to go and put her out of her misery and do it for her. But I don't, because I know better now, you know. I've had to learn a lot about what it is, the difference. So I sit next to her and I say, you know, Sophia, it's hard for you, but you know, I'm here. And then she'll complain, she'll throw something and look at me and ask me, do it for me. And I will just say, well, let's try again, you know, but I'm here and I know it's hard for you. And oftentimes we'll say, I know how you feel. That's another topic for another day, because do you really know how someone feels? Have you really been in that exact situation, in that exact body, in that exact mind, with that exact life history? Perhaps no, none of us. We're all different, right? So what is compassion? It is an act of love, but I personally believe it and understand it to be being present in a kind and open way, but not necessarily rescuing or saving somebody from a difficult situation.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Puan Sarimah, for sharing about that. It's interesting that you bring up the idea that although love can also be seen of kind of action, that's just one of the aspects of love that we look at the audience. So love, most of the time we tend to perceive love in terms of feeling, but at the same time it can also be action. Whereas on Puan Sarimah's perspective, on linking compassion to love is that compassion is not so much on the idea of feeling, but it's more on an action base. Like really put ourselves in the perspective on the other shoe, not necessarily to rescue from the person or what he or she is actually going through, but to be there for the person. So thanks so much, Puan Sarimah, for sharing about that. Let's have a quick one from Salah, perhaps, because interestingly, one of the types of love is also filial love, which is actually considered as a friendship type of love. Perhaps what are your few thoughts on the idea of friendship being applied in the context of love? Salah, goes to you.
I think one very good example that we can give is the concept of bromance. And I don't want to say that well, philia exclusively applies to, you know, man kind of friendship. Well, of course, it generalizes to all types of friendship that's out there. But when you're talking about something like a deep connection between two people that's not sexual, but at the same time deeply intimate, on so many levels, well, perhaps bromance, you know, give us a very, very good example. And well, it's interesting how different cultures, you know, deal with this, and how historically this idea of bromance developed. Sorry, I want to go into a bit of specific of bromance here, because I think it's less talked about. And when we look at the history of bromance, it seems that the word bromance came into use just quite recently, perhaps 25 to 30 years ago. But the practice of it has been present for centuries, especially back in the US. But something happened in the 1950s, and it was the release of a study or like a survey that said, you know, there are other practices, you know, sexual practices that happens between men, you know, like homosexual practices. And then the other survey came out and said, you know, well, perhaps 1 in 10 Americans are gay. And then another survey came out and said, you know, being gay is like strongly associated with having like carrying HIV virus, you know. So the entire US society was freaked out about this idea of, you know, men hanging out together intimately. And it's interesting because before that, when you trace back, you know, track back the letters that was, you know, exchanged between, I guess it was Abraham Lincoln and a fellow guy friend, you see like the level of intimacy in that friend is not something that we usually nowadays see communicated between two men, you know. Or there are others, you know, like other reports that another president, US president, you know, like used to have a guy friend who would share a bed with him. I mean, it was a non-sexual relationship, but they would just share the bed, you know. So that kind of a homosocial behavior was really present before the incident, before the report was out. But then after the report got out, this idea of like not homophobia per se, but homohysteria developed, the fear of being associated, you know, with kind of like gay, you know, qualities. And after that, this relationship, this same-sex kind of friendship kind of like collapsed, you know, in the American society. And only when the LGBTQ kind of like movement started to normalize, you know, the differences, the way different, you know, kind of like the way exclusive different genders can be in terms of borrowing qualities from each other, you know, like men being more feminine and like a woman being more masculine kind of thing. Not to say that we are trying to feminize men or like masculinize a woman, but like the possibility that there can be a shared ground, you know, a common ground between these two genders that helped a lot with bringing this intimacy back in the American history. And I think it's kind of like leaking out to the entire world nowadays that, acts of romance are getting more normalized, even though in Malaysia still we don't see, men kissing even on the cheeks, but like it's something that's, getting more normalized, things like that, or saying I love you to a male friend. So that's like a brief history I can give you on how the idea of bromance came into place, and the good example that it could share, on the concept of philia and how deep the connection can go between two people without confusing it with a sexual relationship.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing.
Can I add in there, Danny? Are we allowed to interject? Is it okay? As a panel discussion?
We still have more questions coming up.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
we'll leave that for the next going on. But thanks for bringing that up, Puan Sarimah.
All right. Okay.
So from what we can hear over here, audience, is that we can see how most of the time we may feel there's a very clear, distinct boundaries, or sometimes it may clash as well on how far to the extent of we want to express love in the friendship, because we do not want to mistake that this friendship will eventually turn out romance relationship if we do not want it to, but we are so afraid to draw that boundary. So we can say there's actually a very clear distinction in that sense that sometimes the way we express love in a friendship doesn't necessarily mean that it is actually sexual, or it means that it's actually a romantic kind of relationship. So thanks for sharing, putting your input on that, Salah. All right. So moving on to the next one will be the next question for Dr. Leyla. Back to you. Is that what are the necessities of love and relationship in our life?
Yeah, in fact, the interesting part of it is I found that it's all about relationship. Even the definition of religion is relationship between man and God, for example. So relationship and connectivity plays a very important role in humanity. But when people are asked to describe what are the basic necessities for life, people, most of the time, they often say there is food and water and shelter. But they seldom mention that in their list, they mention about close relationship, for example, in the top 3. But based on research, research demonstrates that we are a social creature and we need to have relationship with others to survive and thrive, right? Even one kind of punishment is when in prison they put us in isolation group, right? So it is really punishment. So based on that, I would like to share with you a beautiful, emotive poem called Bani Adam from Saadi. Bani Adam means humankind. And Saadi, 8 centuries ago, a Persian poet, he said that beautifully: human beings are members of a whole in creation of one essence and soul. If one member is afflicted with pain, other members uneasy will remain. If you have no sympathy for human pain, the name of human you cannot retain. Here, Saadi talks about love, sympathy, and compassion beautifully. So you consider the whole humanity as a whole body, and if I have pain in my hand, for example, the whole body is suffering and helping to cure this hand. So definitely, we need to have this love and compassion and friendship and improve it. And it is a beautiful quote that, the point that Sarimah mentioned about compassion, I agree with her. And it is, and I believe that love and compassion are contagious. And we were amazed how we can spread the compassion to each other. Back to you, Danny.
Beautifully put. Thanks so much, Dr. Leyla, for sharing about this the whole idea of, especially based on your sharing, we can relate so much to the pandemic for the last 2 years. We can see it's so prevalent in the idea that we have been so isolated at home. We have been most of the time alone by ourselves during the pandemic, and we can see the need to belong, the need to connect, the need for a relationship. And the relationship here, once again, is not so much about the romance relationship, but to simply just connect with one another. And it's so prevalent what has been shared by Dr. Leyla on how love and relationship is so prevalent here to connect one another, linking to the idea of compassion and friendship. Just out of curiosity to Salah or perhaps Puan Sarimah, what are your thoughts about this when it comes to love and relationship, and how it once again linked to the idea of compassion, or perhaps for Salah on the idea of friendship?
May I?
Yeah.
All right.
Perhaps if Puan Sarimah after that would like to interject, back to Puan Sarimah after that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no worries.
So I guess like Sandy here borrows the idea of, dealing with human beings as a member of a whole from the saying of Prophet Muhammad as well, which is quite directly, in line with the same idea, and also the Jesus's quote on, a single body that all humans are from, and it kind of like reminds us on the unity of existence, and that everybody present here is the breath of God blown into the human body, and from that it is which we are alive. That's why, like you hear the news, like there's a war in Syria, there's a war in Iraq, and you just can't sit still. If you have a bit of humanity left in you, I mean, you could be living in a very peaceful situation and like don't even mind what's going in the rest of the world, but like you can't actually, like it's something like it gains your nature, it makes you uneasy, even though it's not your family, it's not your friend who's suffering, it's just a human being, a living soul, somebody who breathes, somebody who goes to work, somebody who feeds children, like somebody who's responsible for a few people in life, and his presence or her presence matters on a level or two to some people. So I guess that's something that we can all relate to on some levels.
Beautiful, Salah, for sharing about that. Wondering if Puan Sarimah have any thoughts about this? Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Well, what I was going to say earlier when I interjected after Salah spoke was mainly when he mentioned about the homophobic response to intimacy and closeness and friendship between men. Unfortunately, that gave rise to an awful lot of male bravado sort of culture. And it's strange because what happens when you see a human being who's become detached from expression of love, whether it be for themselves due to a traumatic childhood or an environment that's quite violent, where they have to actually dissociate and like just shut down to exist and to survive. Similarly, in friendships, if you are sort of smacked on your hand and said, you're not allowed to care for this person because he or she is a he or she, it causes a shutdown, I think, in a human being. And a lot of studies have shown that human beings who are not allowed to connect with other human beings suffer from many, many, many mental health conditions and psychiatric conditions later on in life. I mean, I'm talking about studies, for example, if you look 40, 50 years ago, studies on the Romanian orphans and how they were given just enough milk and their diapers were changed, but they were deprived of touch, and that human touch, that human care and love and bonding that can only be provided by another human being, and the results from that in terms of how some of the children actually died. So we're not talking about a privilege here to love other people or to be allowed to express love, be it between all sexes. And I'm not talking about sexual love here. It's just like Salah said, just having the ability to express love and care for another human being needs to be more normalized. It needs to be encouraged, because what we have is sort of like, it's like an elastic band. It's gone the other way, the other extreme, where there's so much bravado and hatred and anger that comes as a defense mechanism because you're not allowed. And that is like a survival instinct, you know. You either die or be killed, sort of. So if I can't die and I shut down in myself because I can't get the love that I need or I want to give, then you build up that emotion. It becomes anger, and it comes out as something else. And I think the whole world collectively is suffering from a fear of expressing care and love for another who is deemed, for example, the wrong sex, race, religion. So when that's cut, you know, it's a very unfortunate thing that us humans have done to ourselves. You know, this I don't think this is evolution or religion. This is something we've done to ourselves, you know, and I think it can be avoided. And I like to follow, I'd like to quote from the words of a very renowned doctor and speaker and author, Dr. Gabor Mate, who I very much, I love his work. And he says, never ask why the addiction, but ask why the pain. And if you look him up, he talks a lot about the loss of self, and it's self-love he talks about, and the loss of compassion for yourself, and the feeling of how isolation can affect a human being mentally and physically. It's tremendous.
Beautifully put, Puan Sarimah. Thanks for sharing about that. And once again, our audience over here, we can see how love and relationship all plays a role across all three different contexts, be it in love, in compassion, or even in friendship. And we can see how compassion also plays a role when it comes to friendship or romantic relationship or any kind of love relationship, and it helps to build up love from there as well. Without further ado, let's move on to the next question. Back to Dr. Leyla, all right? What is self-love and how can we actually practice self-love? Perhaps that's the most curious question, or we have been hearing a lot in social media. Self-love, self-care, self-love everywhere. Dr. Leyla, back to you.
Yeah, that's a very common question nowadays. Actually, self-love is about getting in touch with ourselves and our well-being, of course. It's about nurturing and growing the parts of ourselves that lead us to happiness. And true self-love is, in fact, self-acceptance. As you can see, I provided the chart, and self-forgiveness, self-care, self-control, self-discipline, boundaries, self-awareness, and self-compassion, which is a very important component. And self-love means having trust, confidence, and maybe pride in yourself and your abilities. So practicing self-love means setting boundaries, being mindful, removing toxic people from our life. These are how you practice self-love. And to develop self-love, you can seek a therapist, you can journal your feeling. Journaling will be helpful, and also listening to some kind of affirmation. So how we can practice self-love is based on whatever I researched, I found out a triangle. So if you want to practice self-love with intention, attention, and action, we can practice self-love. For example, I want to have a healthy diet, for example. I want to avoid sugar for like 40 days, right? So this is practicing self-love. So intention is, okay, this is the statement. Sugar is cutting off from my, for example, meal. And then with attention is the time that I want to, for example, go and take some coffee with sugar. I pay attention to avoid that. And then action is, I don't drink my coffee with, for example, sugar. So this is the way intention, attention, and action work. But I will talk about it maybe more. But the most important thing that we need to remember is self-love is a journey. It is a dynamic. It is a lifetime process. Sometimes you don't practice self-love, but sometimes you do. Sometimes there are some ups and downs, never ended this journey. And if we consider self-love as a journey, the very, very first stage of this journey is self-realization. Self-realization means understanding of the self. So I need to know what, we need to know what is our weaknesses and what are our strengths, and highlighting our values. So it is all about answering the question of who am I? So if we answer that question, we started the journey, because the first stage is self-realization. And once we know who we are, who we aim to be, because we understand that, okay, this is my aim, but this is me, but I want to elevate myself to reach to that stage, we need to be aware of our intention, improve our observation, that I said attention, with skill. This is kind of a skill. And then be aware of our behavior or action. And this is how we practice self-love.
Beautiful. Thanks, Dr. Leyla, for sharing that. So for our audience, if there's one point to take away over here is remember the intention behind in anything that we do, because that intention will drive us in terms of how we actually practice self-love, all right? But interestingly, though, what's come to my mind is that relating to Puan Sarimah's idea on compassion, most of the time we confuse between the idea of self-love and self-compassion. Sometimes we tend to interchange these two together at the same time as well. What are your thoughts about this, Puan Sarimah?
Hi, thanks, Danny. I think that self-love and self-compassion is a state of mind and an understanding where you realize where you are, whether it's in a difficult situation or an easy situation or just a neutral situation, and you utilize the resources that are available to you for the betterment of your mind and your heart and your body, without. This is where it gets sensitive, because a lot of people, let's say, for example, you're in a relationship and you have an argument with your spouse, and neither are wrong and neither are right. It's just a misunderstanding. But then you say, I'm going to do self-love. I have self-love, self-care. I'm going to go away for a week and leave you with the children so that I could take care of myself because you've hurt me. Now, a lot of people would say, you go, girl. Yeah, you know, you deserve that self-love. You know, you don't need to sit at home and deal with that. You can look at this in very many like different lenses. Is it self-love? Is it really self-care? Taking yourself out of the situation is a temporary distraction and a temporary relief. So are you looking to define self-love and self-care as a long-term thing or a short-term thing? Because we can all distract from pain and call it self-love using various coping skills. Some people drink, some people run marathons, some people go on never-ending holidays. I've been there. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like what Dr. Leyla mentioned, self-love is to know yourself. Now, how can you truly know yourself if you don't sit with yourself? And when I say sit with yourself, I mean sit with yourself in the pain that you really have. Because if you're constantly running from yourself, and yourself includes pain and suffering as well, is that really self-love? Are you offering yourself the opportunity to grow? For example, for me, I had postnatal depression 2 years ago. And what triggered it was not just the birth of my child, but it was as a result of running for 20 years from inherent deep issues. And I thought I was fine. I thought that going on never-ending holidays and spas and, you know, staying away from certain people who you would define as negative people, only positive vibes, sort of toxic positivity, but not necessarily. I'm not sure still about that. But there's only so much running, that's my point, that you can do in life. And you may call that self-love, and that's the problem. Because what is true self-love? What is real self-care? Is it running from problems, or is it remaining in the pain, pushing through it with compassion for yourself and others, and then coming out at the other end? And therefore it changes your trajectory from there on, you and the people in your life. Because I see a lot of stuff on social media about self-love, self-care, no negativity. And I worry for a lot of people because I've been there, and it catches up eventually. You've got to face some things head on. And that, I believe, is also self-love. And that is also part of being compassionate, saying, this is difficult. I might be crying my eyes out. I might be going through so much difficulty. I might have to see a professional for help. And that is part of self-love. A lot of people wait till it's too difficult and it's too hard, and divorces have happened, or people have been hurt physically, mentally. And then they say, now I'll take care of myself or my family. We as a society tend to push ourselves past our own abilities, and we call it self-love, but actually it's just running away a lot of the times. These are only my personal opinions from my own experience. And when I sat down after my postnatal depression and I practiced true self-love, there were no holidays, there were no shortcuts, there were no temporary distractions. There was only tears, pain, therapy for a good 6 to 8 months. And I came out of there feeling so much more loving and compassionate for myself and the people in my life, including those who I thought had done me wrong. So that is a journey that I believe encapsulated and describes my journey of self-love. But every individual is different, I understand. However, we just need to be a little bit more careful about what we call self-love. Is running away self-love? But of course, I do not encourage anyone to stay in a situation where, you know, there is abuse or difficulty in terms of, you know, something that's hurting you. That, of course, is not self-love. But that's another conversation where people will stay in self-sacrifice and say, but I'm loving this person, but you're actually hurting yourself.
Beautifully put, Puan Sarimah. And it's very courageous of you to face that challenges of your time in what it's been the self-love to you. And this really links to the idea of what perhaps Salah said, point of view in terms of this. It's something related to the idea of facing our shadow. And perhaps Salah can share your thoughts about this as well in terms of how self-love may be implemented in friendship context.
Okay, if I were to start, okay, I was to talk about it later, but like now that you brought it up, why not? So, you know, when people ask me like, well, you know, what represents friendship to me, or like what defines friendship, I'd usually think of a perhaps like a safe, I mean, like, okay, just bear with me using these words all together, safe battlefield where you fight your shadows in a holy encounter. You know, so we have the holy, we have the encounter, we have safe, and then we have the battlefield, you know, all contradictory words here. But I think what friendship provides is, you know, like a safe platform for you to express yourself the way you are without fearing judgment, without fearing that you're about to be casted out, you know, or like being downgraded for the beliefs or like for the character that you carry. So, and when that self without a mask, you know, comes to expression without any persona involved, and you get in touch, you know, with your true self. And why it's important to have somebody there, you know, to make it safe is because you're entering a very dangerous place, a very dangerous realm within yourself that you have a hard time accepting, you know, and that's what a true friendship should provide for you, a platform for you to be able to speak about yourself, you know, with no limitation whatsoever. And I think that makes it very safe for you to be who you are. And when you are who you are, and express yourself the way you are, you can actually like you kind of like find those blind spots, you know, within yourself. You know, something that you didn't realize or you didn't expect to come up in a conversation with a friend, but just because he provided you with this, you know, blissful opportunity to speak, you know, to free associate, then things would come up in a very unexpected way, and you get to know yourself in a very different way, in a way that you are not, in a way that you thought you were not, and that's a very scary thing to happen to you, because perhaps you're 25 years and you've been living with that self of yours for 25 years and you've known yourself in that particular manner. So it's very difficult to get detached from, from who you thought you were and relearn yourself, and become an upgraded version of the same person. So I think that's all that friendship should encompass and provide. And, that's the ultimate friendship that we should aim and strive for when we talk about friendship. And it's not a word that should be taken lightly, or, should be passed around like, he's my friend, he's my buddy. Don't use that word like that, because then you risk, kind of like degrading the value of friendship you're expecting in your life, if you're not expecting, like a good quality of outcome from it. So that's what I have to say.
Amazing.
Can I just add a little, Danny, there?
Yes, go ahead.
It's true. It's like what Salah was saying about acceptance. That was the key word that came out of that for me. And truly accepting who we are. Often we wear masks, we walk around with masks, whether we're students, we're working, we're mothers, we're performers, teachers, whatever we do in our lives. Often there are masks and different layers and layers that we place, to the point that whether you've been on the planet 25 years or 45 years, obviously the older you get, the more masks you tend to put on. And after a while, it becomes difficult to find even yourself, to be able to accept yourself as self-love, and to be able to accept others, I think creates friendship bonds that are truly, how would I say, meaningful. Because often we have friends, but when we call them friends, do they know us, or do they know the masks that we present ourselves with? And are they then feeling obliged to put on their masks for us? So it's a very interesting way that us humans cope with that. But especially in Malaysia, there's a lot of not wanting to lose face, and that kind of culture encourages a wearing of the mask often. And a lot of friends don't really truly know what their friends are going through until it becomes either too late or tragic or something. So in Asian cultures, especially in Malaysia, the wearing of the mask and not knowing oneself is a very big concern. And that is something that I myself used to have several masks, especially with my job. Only when I removed the masks and really showed the raw personality were my friends, the real friends, able to do the same and come closer to me.
Beautifully shared, Puan Sarimah, as well, and Salah on the idea of how is it linked to the idea of compassion and friendship. And not to forget our Dr. Leyla over here sharing with us on the idea of self-love and how can we practice that. So moving on to our next session is on the idea of compassion, and this question is posed to Puan Sarimah actually. In your opinion, why do we have difficulty in giving compassion to ourselves? And how do we realize that we actually need compassion for ourselves at the end of the day?
Well, I think we're raised, it depends again on how we're raised in a certain family and how our parents have modeled that kind of idea of compassion. Back to what we said when we first started, is it a self-sacrificing behavior, or is it compassion sitting through the difficulty for yourself and your family members? Or is it being part of a triangle of, rescuer, perpetrator? It depends, what you're raised in. Everybody has a role often in a family. And, whether you're the rescuer, the perpetrator, or the victim, usually it's interchangeable. And there's not really any room for compassion when you're in a triangle like that, because everybody's too busy putting on a mask of a role. So compassion to me, it comes back down to being able to be truthful and accept yourself and the person who's in front of you for who they are, flaws and all, and being able to sit with them through that and accept them. What Salah said, the word accept is actually the biggest. Know yourself, accept, and sit with yourself and another. That is true compassion, I believe, without the masks, because it doesn't allow for connection when you're not really truly being genuine. But often we don't even know who we are. until we sit back and remove all the coping skills.
Beautifully shared, Puan Sarimah. I think Puan Sarimah also roughly share in terms of why is it difficult in terms of the idea of our mask that we put on forward, and that blocks us from really being compassionate to ourselves and also to practice self-love at the same time as well. And perhaps linking this to the idea, perhaps your perspective, Dr. Leyla, like compassion and love, once again, it's kind of come hand in hand. We always tend to interpret these two at the same time together. What are your thoughts in terms of how can we actually implement compassion in the aspect of love as well?
Yeah, actually, as Salah and Sarimah mentioned, self-compassion is a pillar of self-love. So self-compassion is like involves treating ourselves as a dear friend, the friend that who has hard time. So by practicing self-compassion, we realize that we can be on our team. That's why self-forgiveness, that's why I'm calling self-compassion as a pillar. Self-forgiveness, discipline, all of these comes after that. So we shouldn't forget the power of self-compassion. It's like a guiding light for us. And it allows us to face our darkness, actually. This is very powerful and strong. And there are 3 elements of self-compassion. I do not want to go in detail, but I just mentioned that it is, one is kindness, the first element. The second element of self-compassion is common humanity. Everyone has, for example, if you are going to divorce situation, other people also have the same difficulties, or this coronavirus pandemic. And the third element of self-compassion is mindfulness. So if we be kind to ourselves first, and then with others, and then it's common humanity. So everyone else maybe have the same problem or similar problem. So it's not big deal, not poor me situation, this kind of thing. And the last one is mindfulness. And by telling you about mindfulness, I believe that it is intention, attention, and action. So with when we are aware what's going on here, so definitely we can practice self-compassion, and it is not easy, and to each person is different. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing, Dr. Leyla. And just for every this audience here today, Puan Sarimah have to leave in a very short while, 11-15 minutes. So let's have more inputs from Puan Sarimah in terms of the idea of compassion. So the next question is that for Puan Sarimah, you mentioned along the lines initially the idea of compassion, and you bring up the point of the idea of action and feeling. So could you please share with us more about in terms of that perspective is compassion actually an action or a feeling? If let's say you were to pick a stand, which one would you divert more towards to?
I would definitely say it's an action which comes from a feeling, but depending on what the feeling is, you know, it comes after, as Dr. Leyla said, you know, it is a lot of things that contribute to the feeling. What exactly the feeling is depends on your understanding of, you know, whether or not you're mindful, whether or not you feel a commonality with what the person's going through and such. So true compassion, I think, is an ideal. I mean, you know, not everybody can be compassionate all the time. You know, we all have difficult days, and, you know, we're going through our own internal battles too. But in order to be compassionate, the behavior itself has to come from a feeling. But I see it as an act, because if it's only thought, then you can't even, it's difficult to label it. But then that brings it back to love as well, isn't it? What is love? People always say, you know, if you can't see it, that's why I always say the actions speak louder than the words, right? So compassion is an action. It is an understanding and a feeling, and then a behavior. That's what I see it.
Beautifully put, Puan Sarimah. If let's say perhaps we can have a few input from Salah or maybe Leyla, what are your thoughts about, if let's say in terms of perspective of love or friendship, do you think it's more towards on the action basis or feeling basis?
I think
Salah first. Yeah.
I think I think like for me, it's again more on action, you know, because well, you can feel all you want to feel, you know, but what's the outcome of that feeling and that sensation running through your veins, you know? And if you don't put it to practice, then there's no witness of that compassion that you felt within. So you wanna make the world bear witness of the kind act and the compassionate act that you did for someone, and that even slightest change that you try to make, and perhaps you're successful in making that small change. And we're all hopeful that you'll be able to do so, you know, with acting that feeling out in a safe way that's respectful of people's boundaries and at the same time, you know, meeting their needs.
Beautifully put, Salah. Perhaps Leyla, if there's a few sentences.
Only I agree. It start with feeling love and end up with the action. So passion is a very strong energy that end up with action, but compassion is even more deeper than passion. So yeah, I agree with that.
Beautifully put. Thanks, Dr. Leyla, Salah, for your input as well. Perhaps the last question for Puan Sarimah on the area of compassion is that since our youth audience over here, the idea of mass may be quite a little bit heavy for us to relate to. If let's say you were to share a few tips or maybe one or two simple steps, suggestions for our youth audience here today in terms of practicing self-compassion, how would you suggest? Yeah.
Oh my goodness, you know, I'm all for like facing things head on. You know, self-compassion to me is a little bit more brutal perhaps than your average person because of the experiences that I've had with depression, anxiety, postnatal depression. And I mean, a lot of people have been through worse than I've been through, but I've been through quite a lot of things as well. And I think those things have made me stronger, those life experiences. I practice self-compassion now by saying, you don't need to work out that hard, Sarimah. You don't need to smile that much, Sarimah. You don't need to say you're okay that much. You don't need to say yes to everything. And you don't have to sit and suffer anymore. And when I made the decision to change my life and truly do what I wanted to do and be around the people I really wanted to be around, not those who I think or was expected to be around or do things. That's how I practice self-compassion for myself. And what I do now is if I'm faced with a problem at home, like with my husband or my child or my friends or at work with a client that's difficult, I sit back and I try to be mindful and I say, hey, what's the outcome that I really want from this situation? Do I want a confrontation? Do I want my day to be affected? Or do I want to just get through this as two human beings, respect each other, number one, respect myself, respect the other human being, and come out on the other end not having used up too much energy? And that's having self-compassion rather than, you know, I'm going to fight until I'm proven right. You know, is that truly self-compassion? No, it's not. It's using up your energy. It's stressing yourself out, for me anyway. So I practice self-compassion daily, and I would say that it's choosing your battles within as well, not seeking perfection. There's no such thing ever. Not comparing yourself to other human beings because they have a completely different body, mind, genetics, blood running through their veins. We're all different. And understanding that you are unique. Your pains, your joys are all, I would say, not permanent. And we evolve, and have compassion for yourself to understand that what we have today is only what you can see, and tomorrow is yet to come. I always say that.
Beautiful. Thanks for sharing on the few tips on that side in terms of practicing self-compassion, Puan Sarimah. We can see that from Puan Sarimah's side, it's a little bit brutal, but for our youth audience over here, if you happen to pick a few tips that you can get to relate in your daily life, by all means, please practice that in your daily life. Surely be beneficial to you in any way. Once again, thanks Puan Sarimah for sharing your ideas on the compassion. And so far, we also have Dr. Leyla to share on the idea of love. Moving on to our last segment of the topic of today is that friendship. All right, so let's have the first question for our Salah here today is that what is friendship to you in layman terms? Yeah, go to your one, Salah.
Finally, we got here. So I think I already mentioned what I think, friendship is to me personally, like the idea of, of having a holy encounter with your shadows, so that'll be, pretty much my take on it. But let's start with what C.S. Lewis think, of what friendship is. And there's a very interesting quote by him saying friendship is unnecessary, like philosophy, like art, like the universe itself. It has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things which give value to survival. So, you could all, be alive, but not living, and perhaps friendship is actually like it's a platform to provide you with certain reasons for living, and when you look through the reasons why people try to end their lives or like try to commit suicide, loneliness is many a time the reason, and perhaps, if you are more friendly to one another, we would have provided each other with more reason for living. So that would be one, on what friendship is. For more on others' views on friendship, perhaps you could like visit T-Buddy's Instagram page. We did a project, we do have a project called T-Buddy's Dictionary, where we ask people opinion of the topics of discussion that we have in our podcast. And recently we had this topic of friendship going on, and people gave us their definition of friendship. And a few themes came up, like, it kind of transcend the idea of time and space, no matter how long you've been separated, when you come back, you have tons of things to talk about. The idea of like a friend being the second home or a second family kind of thing, or, friend is somebody, the first person that comes to your mind when your car breaks down, in the middle of the way. So these are the few definitions that people gave us. You could go and check it. There are like 22 definitions of friendship by real people. But one thing that's like worth mentioning about, the uniqueness of friendship is that it's a consensual, agreemental kind of relationship. It's not that you were born into a family in a certain birthday or birth time, and then you open your eyes and this was your father, this was your mother, these were your siblings. You had no choice in choosing who you were connected to or like who you were related to. But the interesting thing is, like, you can't actually, unlike other agreements, other consensus, you can't actually pinpoint on a time and a date and say, okay, this was the time that we became friends. This was the time that we actually knew that we're gonna, like, this is friendship, and we grew, like, to become friends. There's no such thing in friendship. It's a very gradual, very kind of like sometimes very, very slow process. Sometimes it takes years, to develop like a true friendship. And the fact that society doesn't actually, this is another interesting fact about friendship. Society doesn't usually make you ready or like expect you to be ready for friendship, because it's not a sequential, happening like marriage is, or like going to university is, or, like something like your biological clock, by when that you want to have kids, or, things like that. So it's not that at certain stage, you'll be expected to have friends. So nobody prepares you for that. Actually, nobody thinks that, okay, you're going to have friends, so you need these kind of resources to be a good friend. Nobody mentions that. And, well, for a long time, I thought that was actually like representing like, I don't know, like something, as if something was lacking about friendship. But then I gave it more thought, and I thought perhaps it's because friendship, again, transcends time, and it's a timeless kind of relationship. That's why perhaps societies don't really invest much time on, like preparing you for that. I'm not really encouraging that society should remain that way, but I'm saying that it might be because, that it's timeless and spaceless. You can be somebody's friend over social media, like you can develop friendships over there. Or, it can just happen to you anytime. So those are a few things that makes friendship what friendship is. And we have a quote by Gibran here, one of my all-time favorite poets. He's filled which you sow with love and reap with thanksgiving. So the more you give, the more you receive. And you're not there to only take or to only give, but to do both. And that's you know, the idea of a safe, healthy, good friendship. Pay attention to the meme as well.
Beautifully put, Salah. Thanks for sharing about the idea of friendship on this. All right. So we are aware that Puan Sarimah got to make a leave soon, really soon, by 11:30 by chance. Is there something that you need to leave soon, Puan Sarimah? Just a quick check-in about that.
Oh no, I'm fine. I'll stay till 11:30. I've just arranged it, so don't worry.
Okay, beautifully put. Thanks, Puan Sarimah, for checking on that as well. So unfortunately, due to time right now, we are supposed to move into the Q&A question, but perhaps we leave a very last two gem for our audience here today on the idea of toxicity friendship and the divine friendship as well. So perhaps, Salah, could you please share with us a little bit more about the idea of toxicity and divine friendship in a very short one, so that we can wrap it up with the Q&A for our audience as well.
Sure. I'll just share my own story. I would like to first mention that I've never been in a toxic, you know, kind of like friendship relationship. Thank God, you know, I was perhaps blessed, or it was my mom's prayer or
Lucky
something.
you.
Yeah, lucky me, definitely. But I'd like to mention that I was close to a point that I was getting close to being the toxic one in a friendship. And I will explain how and how it happened and why. Well, you know, like for the first, when you don't have something, but you think about it so passionately, if I ever had that, if I only got that, you know, you start fantasizing, you start idealizing. And I didn't have a good friend, a close friend, a best friend. For the first 16 years of my life, I used to be known as the shyest person of my family. And like, that might come as a surprise to you because I'm very outspoken right now, you know, but you know, I always envied my brother for having all those good friends, best friends, all those buddies he hanged out with, you know. And back then, I thought he was, you know, he was a disgrace to family because my father didn't approve of his friends, you know, back in the time. And I was like, what the hell are you trying to do here? You know, like trying to outdo family with like mingle around with those known people, you know. So I thought I was protecting the family image, but years later I realized that it was actually an envy, because deep down I really wanted those things that my brother had, you know. So that there comes the idea of, you know, fighting shadows, you know, realizing and self-realization that Ms. Sarimah already mentioned. You know, I realized that I was envious of my brother's experiences. So long story short, for the first 16 years, I was developing this image of friendship, definition of friendship. I created a frame of friendship, you know, of best friendship. So I would put people into that frame. You know, I wouldn't look at them as people, living souls anymore. They would just fit that frame of best friendship. And the moment they did something wrong outside that frame, I would like, they could have done 20 other good things, you know, they met 20 other criteria, but like when they did something that was slightly outside that frame, I was like, this is not what a best friend does. So what you do, what happens here when you carry a frame and put people in a frame is that you disregard and you dismiss their personhood, their personality, their character, and all you need them to be is to fit your frame. And that is the absolute charm for toxicity, you know, or like in friendship, because what you are doing, actually creating, you're actually encouraging the idea of people putting a mask before you and like practicing a persona. And that shouldn't happen within a friendship. And if it did, God help you.
Beautifully put. Thanks for sharing on that, Salah. And unfortunately, the idea of friendship when it comes to it is that we know as much as we hope it to be as rainbow as possible, unfortunately, on the other end, there is a toxicity involved. And based on Salah's experience sharing on the idea of toxicity in friendship, we hope that the audience over here gains some insights from that as well, in terms of how can we manage our friendship or any kind of relationship, be it the good and the bad, and how can we actually manage our relationship at the end of the day, all right? So now is the time for a Q&A for our audience over here. If you happen to have any burning questions or curious questions that you have regarding all across the three themes, love, compassion, and friendship, for our three guest esteemed speakers over here, once again, please head on to the Padlet if you wish to ask your question anonymously, or alternatively, you may also include your question in the chat box, or feel free to press the raise hand function in the Zoom function over here, and our team will direct you and you may unmute yourself to share as well. All right. So we have a few questions came in already. And the first question is that, here's the first question. Okay, so the first question is that is being happy for others, for example, being happy when somebody attains success, and especially those we have really close to our hearts. And also being happy for something really simple, such as seeing someone smile, a type of love too. Or is it more on the compassion side? Perhaps this question is posed for me, Dr. Leyla and Puan Sarimah, or maybe Salah could chip in after that as well if you wish to. Yeah, to the three speakers.
I don't know, Dr. Leyla, what do you think of this? Being happy for others. It's an interesting question. I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm such a deep thinker. When I see this question, I don't even look at the question. I'm just thinking why the person needs to ask this question. It makes me wonder if the person's feeling bad about feeling happy for others. And then, oh my God, does it come back to envy again, Salah? Haha, here we go. We could go there. I mean, okay, let's take it as it is at face value then, okay? Being happy for others, is it love or compassion?
It is
I
love.
don't know.
Others,
It
right?
is love.
Also,
It would definitely be a love, a feeling of joy for other people's well-being. What do you think, Dr. Leyla?
Yeah, I agree. As we mentioned, there are different types of love, and compassion also is kind of love, right? So
yes,
definitely it is love and compassion together. And we are here to make ourselves happy and our friends happy, even our community, our planet, even our nature, right? So
yes,
we have to be connected with each other, and I believe that our goal is being happy inner and outer, right?
yes. And I heard something, I think it was yesterday or the day before. I can't quite remember where exactly I heard it, but it was in a podcast, one of them I was listening to, and they were saying that, oh yes, it was the holistic psychologist. I was listening to her, Nicole Pereira, and she was saying that the energy that we give each other, it comes back to us full circle. So even in this talk right now, how Danny feels, how you feel, how I feel, how everyone here is feeling is actually circling and creating the vibe, whether or not we like it or are aware of it. So we are helping each other to create the vibe that we feel, and that is the collective power. So for me, when I see people happy and excited and joyful, I feel happy and excited and joyful, but I do feel a bit of envy. I mean, I do. I mean, don't we? Don't we all crave that? I want to feel like that too. And actually, you know, it's just human nature to want the joy that you see, right? But I think we can be part of it. We can be part of it.
Sometimes envy has a positive and play positive role in our life.
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? It bring motivation to us. What do you think?
True. True.
I mean, that's true, because we have categorized envy, you know, in the psychological literature, and there is something called, like, if I'm not mistaken, was it called benevolent envy, or like, I don't know, something like that. So if it's something that encourages you to get something that you like, why not envy as much as you can?
Exactly. So I think it's love and it is compassion. Yeah, that's true. Is that okay, Danny?
Beautifully put. Thanks for the input.
Daniel's got his hand up.
Yeah.
All right. So yeah, I got a question, and this mostly involves friendship. So to all the speakers, what are your thoughts on someone changing himself or herself in making new friends? Because like from my perspective, I think it's fine for someone to not always be themselves in like introducing themselves to new people, in blending in different type of groups. For example, like me myself, like having a lot of friends means like when I'm when I'm with my introverts friends, I kind of have to like tone down my energy. When I'm with this group of friends, I have to like blend in this, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's a matter of adaptability. So what are your thoughts on that? Because people always say be yourself.
You just answered yourself, Daniel. Like, it's a matter of adaptability. It's something to do that with having, you know, multiple masks or, you know, faces that you just put on with different people. You just would like to accommodate that kind of a affair or relationship with different people, you know, that that best fit their personality. So I am different with different people. You know, when we started Tea Buddies, I kind of like went to different people. I created a video and I acted out something. And I sent the video to a few friends of mine. And some said, this is really not you, you know, who are you trying to be? And some other friends of mine, they said, this is exactly you, you know, and go on and do it. So, you know, like you just act differently with different people, because it just doesn't help at all to act the same with everyone. You know, like some conversations are gonna die, you know, if you just acted the same way, you know, with everyone, and some of the conversation gonna like just blow up. So so you just you know, adapt yourself to different situations. There's nothing wrong to do. Don't feel guilty or shame.
I would say, Daniel, like, I mean, the way you behave depends on the level of trust, and you know, every one of us, like I said, we have masks for different environments and different situations, but it's just a matter of constantly being in touch with the true self. So as long as you're always checking in with your actual self, and your actual self, when I say that, is the person who you are most at peace with being, and not feeling pressure to be something else. As long as that actual self is okay to put on different masks and play different roles, then why not go with it? I mean, as a singer, host, entertainer, I did theater, I've done so many roles, but I found that in every role and in every circle of people, that it was a part of me that I hadn't discovered yet. So sometimes we meet new people and we discover different parts of us, and that's fine. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a question here at the side. I just wanted to, I think it was in response to what we said here. Making everyone happy makes you happy. So does that make it self-love? I don't think it's about making everyone happy. We haven't got the responsibility to make anyone happy. And neither does anyone have the responsibility to make us happy. Ultimately, we only are responsible for ourselves. And if you find joy in seeing other people's happiness, then so be it. But we are not here on this planet. Oh my goodness, it is such a pressure that we put on ourselves and our children and the children's children to feel indebted, macam terhutang, meaning that you owe yourself to another person. And I think when you do that, that's when you're doing self-sacrifice, and that's no longer self-love or self-compassion.
Beautifully put. Thanks to our Dr. Leyla, Puan Sarimah, and Salah for sharing on that. Thanks, Daniel, for your question as well. We still have 2 more questions, but we are aware that Puan Sarimah got to make a leave right now, unfortunately, because her busy is kind of very hectic. And we are very blessed to have Puan Sarimah with us today to actually share her inputs, insights on the area of compassion, of course, about the love and friendship as well. So we still have the last 2 questions. We have Puan Sarimah to leave with us. First, audience may actually stay put to have your last 2 questions to be addressed for Dr. Leyla and Salah as well. So with that said, let's, to the audience, feel free to put your bye or with good wishes to Puan Sarimah over here before we move on to our remaining segment of the Q&A. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Sarimah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
sorry, I have a call that's coming in. So thank you very much to everyone, and God bless. Have a good day. Stay safe.
Have a great day. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Take care. All right. So thanks to once again Dr. Leyla and Salah to actually share your input on the first 2 questions. We still have last 2 questions over here, perhaps for Dr. Leyla and Salah over here as well. The second question is that, is love that comes with conditions is really love? That's the interesting question over here, is that, for instance, if you don't stay faithful to me, then you don't have my love. Is this actually love at the end of the day? Then to break away because this condition is not met, is self-love. So what are your thoughts about this, Dr. Leyla, and perhaps Salah after that?
I would like to use again the question that I apply for myself to my life. So it is, if you ask yourself, what would love do? If it is based on love, and love is light and truth. So if you think it is based on truth and light, definitely you can go for it. But if it is based on jealousy, if it is based on you know, angriness, so definitely it is we need to use that energy, as we mentioned about enviness, something like that, and transform that energy to the positive one, which is love. So definitely it is, energy never dies, you know, you can transform it and you can make it a guideline for our life. Yeah, I hope I answered. What do you think, Sarah?
Oh, well, I think when it comes to, when we say, when we bring the word condition into, I think if those conditions are to set healthy boundaries, then that's definitely like a kind of love, because you're trying to safeguard yourself and the other person, yourself from playing the hero and the other person from falling into the victim role, so playing within boundaries, even though I encourage a bit of, cross boundaries, kind of, sometimes just go over the line to see what's happening, but don't violate it, so that'd be fine. So, as long as it's just those conditions are just to safeguard both parties in the friendship, I think it's still love.
Beautifully, thanks for sharing. And we actually have Kenson over here who raises, and perhaps Kenson want to share something? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Danny. Actually, I just have something to share about regarding the topic of self-compassion. Because I was reading a book also about self-compassion. Just a few thoughts to share on that, because I think just now the discussion was about how to develop self-compassion in someone, right? Or why some people have difficulty to develop self-compassion. I think for me, after I reading a book, which is quite good, I think I'll type the name down there. I would say the topic of self-compassion is actually much deeper compared to just doing it or learning it. It's not that simple. What I see is actually is a belief of oneself and how the world look like. So to have self-compassion, if you remember Dr. Leyla talked about, you need to have like the three components: mindfulness, kindness, and common humanity. The third one actually is about the belief. If you have the belief that everyone in this world, when you grow up, I think this is one of the realization everyone would know as well. Which you grow out, you realize that everyone actually doesn't look as perfect as they are. If you know someone enough, then you know there are some part of them, they are broken. They don't like themselves about. They hated themselves for that, or they feel ashamed or insecure about. It's this realization that I would say shape the belief that if you are suffering right now, if you are feeling bad today, you've done something wrong, you're not as good as you are, who you can become, is the understanding that, all right, I felt this, I experienced hard times, but this experience is not just me, because I know every single human being on the other side, they're living anywhere, they will experience the same thing. And this is, I would say, the starting of self-compassion, because you have this belief everyone will suffer and it's shared among everyone. Then you know that it's not that lonely anymore. It's shared by everyone. And the act of compassion can come in to show that, to acknowledge yourself, right? I felt lonely. I felt like no one can understand me. And everyone else do felt that at the same time in their life as well. And they do have this moment. And because of that, we have a common suffering across human as well. And I would say all this idea around that is to have self-compassion is not that easy to have. Like the next day, then you develop the skill. It's across time and ages to constantly remind yourself, telling your body it's hard, it's tough, but this is how the work look like, and we can work harder. We can, slowly improve on that. And I would say this is only the point where change can happen. To change in the belief, only the action can change. If not, action change wise, you always the belief is no, it's just me, I'm lonely. But no, the belief should change first. Yeah, that's what I would say. That's all. Thanks.
Beautifully shared. Amazingly shared, Kenson. Thank you for sharing with us your input as well. And of course, really grateful for you as an audience to have your input as well. Now we really come almost the end of the time, and perhaps for the additional question we may not address, not to worry, because we will direct these questions to our guest speakers to have their answers, and we will share them in our social media page. So what do I mean by our social media page? Stay tuned, we will come to that, all right? Perhaps to really end our wrap up our beautiful, amazing, and it's such a gem of discussion today on the topic of love, compassion, and friendship. Perhaps let's have the last few words from Dr. Leyla, and after that, Salah, before we move on to the remaining bits of our event. Let's go to Dr. Leyla.
And Okay, I believe that the best thing that I can end up with is don't forget that there are two different journey of love. One is based on desire, the other is based on selflessness, okay, not wanting. So if you want everything for it is self-oriented, that love is doomed and it is not growing up. And if it is, we are talking about friendship and love, we cannot add value to our friend, because friends should be like a mirror, right? So if the love relationship is based on not my everything about me and myself, it is based on not wanting, and there is no expectation, as you mentioned, unconditional love, definitely it can help us to elevate ourselves to the higher place, and it will end up to happiness. One of you mentioned about happiness. I believe that the roadmap of happiness is practicing self-love and love of others.
Thanks for sharing, Dr. Leyla. Salah, what about you?
Great. Yeah, I just like to add that, when going back to like perhaps some how this spirituality surrounding, like friendship and all. I was listening to a rabbi recently, talking about how like how Adam was lonely in the Garden of Eden, and then God said, this is based on Bible, by the way, and God said, it's not good for man to be alone. And then he was like, why is it so bad, for man to be alone while he's, in absolute, bliss, and everything is ready for him. But then the idea is that when you have everything there for you, you have the ultimate capacity to take, but there is no one to give back to. And in order for you to be the wholesome person, man, human being that God created, you need to be both taking and giving at the same time. And that was the reason why Eve was created, so human being could give and take at the same time, but don't give to the point that it's all given, and you don't receive, because that deprives the other person of the chance to making you feel mattered and important, because when you reject all the things from outside and say, I'm going to give and I'm going to give and I'm going to give, I'm not going to take, you're actually like depriving other people of showing their kindness to you, of letting you know that you matter to them and you're important and you play a role in their lives. So that would be my concluding note, have a balance.
Amazing. Thanks to Dr. Leyla and Salah once again as our guest speakers for sharing their insights and inputs in regards to our topic today. And of course, though Puan Sarimah is not here, of course not to forget Puan Sarimah, who shared her amazing insights as well on the compassion across the topic as well. And of course, not to forget to our fellow audience over here. Thank you so much for your questions, because you too actually contribute to this event in making it a much more rich and insightful discussion in regards to our topic today. All right. So now, final of the final, we will truly appreciate it if you can see, according to the slides over here, we will require a feedback from you in terms of roast us with your honest feedback in terms of what do you think of the event today, because guess what, your insightful and valuable feedback will be beneficial to us in preparing for our upcoming events to benefit more audience in the future, if you happen to feel it that way. All right. So once again, our team will send in the link over here for the feedback. You may either scan the QR code or you may access the link from the chat box itself to the feedback form link itself. All right. Next, final of the final. If you are interested and keen to participate by submitting your films in our Mind on Films Season 2 event this year, particularly focusing on the theme of heart and mind, we will be receiving once again their submissions until the end of this year by December 31st, 2021 this year. All right. Once again, for more information, do check out our social media page in IG by just simply search My Mind on Film.my, and it will get you to there to find out more about what is My Mind on Film at the end of the day. Okay, now the real final. Thank you, everyone. Hope that everyone have a good remaining Friday, have a good remaining weekend, and see you all soon next year. We will have the guest speakers to stay with us for a moment. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. It was a lovely talk.
Amazing. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, Doctor.